Hollywood loves to trumpet its legends. But what happens to the stars who get left behind by the machine they once lit up? Imagine being a household name, only to vanish, your voice barely a whisper by the time the final interview rolls around. These are the last words, lost tapes, and almost forgotten confessions of stars who once ruled the silver screen. Ever wonder what Hollywood's vanished royalty really said when the cameras stopped rolling? Well, you're about to find out. Louisa Rener. Here's a Hollywood riddle. Who won 2 Oscars back-to-back, then ghosted the entire industry before she was 30? That's Louisa Rener, the Viennese teardrop, who stormed the 1930s with The Great Ziegfeld and The Good Earth, becoming the first ever double Oscar winner. For a brief, flickering moment, Rener was the most celebrated actress in America. Then, seemingly overnight, she was gone, ditching the studio system for a quiet life in Europe. More myth than memory. Fast forward nearly 70 years. Rener is 104 years old, sharp as a knife, and still a little wicked when she grants a rare, no-holds-barred interview from her London flat. With a laugh, she recalls how MGM tried to mold me into something I was not, calling the studio a sausage machine. She's quick to dismiss her own Oscars as luck not talent, the ultimate mic drop from a woman the industry couldn't box in. She recounts phone calls from Garbo, head-to-heads with Mayer, and how Hollywood devours its own. Even in old age, her eyes gleam with the sly humor that once left Louis B. Mayer shaking in his shoes. Her candor is disarming, even cutting. The real performance, darling, is surviving Hollywood. And as she reflects on being forgotten, there's no self-pity, just a hint of pride. Rener's last words on record? "I did not vanish. I simply walked away. I lived." It's the kind of closing line that should be carved above the Hollywood sign. Gloria Graham. If there's a patron saint of film noir's broken hearts, it's Gloria Graham, the platinum-haired siren whose off-screen scandals nearly outshone her Oscar-winning roles in classics like The Bad and the Beautiful and In a Lonely Place. By the early 1980s, Hollywood had moved on, but Gloria hadn't lost her edge or her secrets. In her final interview, taped in the dim light of a Liverpool television studio, Graham is frail but fiercely present. Cancer is eating away at her body, but she deflects any whiff of tragedy with a half smile and a shrug. She talks about being too complicated for producers, her infamous marriages, and the tabloid rumors that chased her from studio to studio. Hollywood likes its women easy to explain, she says, voice low and amused. I never played along. There's a peculiar vulnerability as she recounts the career that burned fast and left her on the fringes. She remembers Bogart's advice, tales of studio bosses who wanted her smoother, quieter, less real. Yet there's no bitterness, just a kind of noir resignation. Everyone's got a script, even off camera. Mine was always a little too messy for them. The interview wraps with Graham gazing into the camera, eyes defiant. If you're forgotten, you get to be whoever you want, she says, as if letting the audience in on a final secret. Within months, she was gone, leaving behind a legacy as elusive and as unforgettable as her last words. Dolores Del Rio. Once, Dolores Del Rio was the most luminous face in Hollywood, the Mexican beauty who outshone even Garbo and Dietrich in the 1930s. She was elegance personified, breaking barriers as the first Latina superstar in American cinema. But fame in Hollywood comes with strings, and Dolores's wouldn't hold. By the 1940s, racism and studio typecasting had shoved her to the margins. The roles dried up. The spotlight moved on. Decades later, in the twilight of her life, Del Rio agreed to a final interview for a Mexican documentary crew. It's not a typical Hollywood puff piece. She's sitting in her Mexico City home, a world away from the manicured backlots of MGM, surrounded by books, family photos, and Aztec art. Her voice is soft, but there's steel behind it. She talks openly about her exile, how American studios couldn't imagine a leading lady who wasn't blonde. She details the heartbreak of being turned into a stereotype, a fiery Latin, and how those limitations fueled her decision to return home and reinvent herself in Mexican cinema. Del Rio's recollections are raw: the whispered racism, the sense of being exoticized, then discarded, and her pride at finding real artistry back in Mexico, where she starred in some of the nation's greatest films. "In Hollywood, I was a face. In Mexico, I became an artist," she declares, a glint of triumph in her eyes. The interviewer asks what she'd say to young actresses facing the same battles. Her answer is pure fire. "Don't wait for permission. Claim your story. The world remembers those who dare." Within a year, Del Rio was gone, but her final words still blaze, a reminder that forgotten legends sometimes shine brightest on their way out. Laird Cregar. Laird Cregar is the kind of name that classic Hollywood fans whisper about. A brilliant character actor who haunted thrillers like The Lodger and Hangover Square. Cregar was a giant, both physically and in presence. But studio bosses wouldn't give him the romantic leads he craved. Desperate to break out, he embarked on a drastic and dangerous crash diet, shocking the public with his dramatic transformation. Cregar's last radio interview, given shortly after his final film wrapped, is a slice of old Hollywood heartbreak. You can almost hear the strain in his voice as he addresses the rumors swirling around his rapid weight loss. He's candid, sometimes painfully so. "They say I'm chasing the dream, but maybe the dream is chasing me." He laughs, a little hollowly. He talks about the pressure to fit the matinee idol mold, the whispers behind his back, and the isolation of being different in a town obsessed with sameness. In a chilling twist, Cregar admits he's never felt more alive or more terrified. He's eager for the next phase of his career, but wary of the toll. "Hollywood loves a good transformation," he quips, "as long as you survive it." Within weeks, Cregar would be dead at just 31, the victim of a heart attack brought on by his drastic measures. His final interview is a haunting time capsule, a glimpse at an actor on the edge, wrestling with a system that demanded everything and gave nothing back. As the broadcast ends, Cregar's words linger. "Maybe the real performance is learning to survive yourself." In classic Hollywood fashion, the curtain fell too soon. Jean Tierney. In her prime, Jean Tierney was the face of Hollywood perfection. From Laura to Leave Her to Heaven, she played ethereal beauties with an edge, her image seemingly untouchable. But behind those crystalline eyes was a woman fighting invisible battles: mental illness, heartbreak, and the pressure to maintain a flawless facade. In the late 1980s, long after the limelight had faded, Tierney appeared for a final TV interview, a rare sit-down where she spoke freely about the toll Hollywood took on her soul. Tierney is elegant, her voice steady but unguarded. She talks about her breakdowns and time in psychiatric hospitals, the stigma she faced, and how the industry turns vulnerability into a weapon. She recounts how gossip columnists savaged her when she faltered, how co-stars kept their distance, and how she found herself isolated at the peak of her fame. What makes this interview extraordinary is Tierney's refusal to spin her story as tragedy or triumph. She's wry, sometimes sardonic. "Hollywood gave me diamonds and nervous breakdowns in equal measure," she says. She reflects on her journey to recovery, her decision to step away, and her relief at living a life outside the spotlight. When asked if she regretted her career, Tierney is honest. "I regret not protecting myself sooner, but regret is a waste. I survived. That's enough." Her final words are both warning and benediction for anyone chasing the Hollywood dream. Be careful what you wish for, and even more careful what you trade for it. It's the kind of wisdom that doesn't fade, even if the world forgets who said it first. Gail Russell. Gail Russell's story is one of those Hollywood tales that starts in a dream and ends in a headline you wish you could rewrite. With her haunting eyes and fragile presence, Russell enchanted audiences in The Uninvited and played opposite John Wayne in Angel and the Badman. Yet, beneath the surface, she was drowning in anxiety, so severe that she turned to alcohol just to get through a day on set. The studios didn't care. They just wanted another ingenue. The press called her tragic, a label she wore like a scar. In her final interview with the Los Angeles Examiner, Russell was only 36, but sounded both older and oddly youthful. A woman at the edge, but not entirely out of fight. She spoke candidly about her battles with addiction, dismissing the gossip and focusing on her desire to work again. "It's funny," she said. "Hollywood remembers you as long as you're trouble or money. I'd rather be remembered for something real." Her hope was palpable. She wanted a comeback, a fresh start. She even shared plans to audition for new roles, confessing she'd started painting again, her other secret talent, the thing that kept her going when the world felt too sharp. The context of this interview is heartbreaking. Russell was trying desperately to break the cycle of self-destruction and convince Hollywood she was more than a cautionary tale. But the town that made her never really forgave her for falling apart in public. Less than a year later, Russell died of liver failure in her tiny Hollywood apartment, surrounded by canvases no one would see until after her death. Her last words on record ring with a painful kind of honesty. "Everyone deserves a second act, even if nobody's watching." It's the anthem of a star who knew what it meant to be both adored and utterly alone. Marie Provost. Marie Provost was once the toast of the Roaring Twenties, a silent-era comedy star whose flapper charm and comic timing made her one of the most bankable names at Universal and Warner Brothers. But when the talkies arrived, Provost's career didn't just stall, it nosedived, and her personal life followed suit. By the 1930s, she was tabloid fodder, with cruel headlines about her weight and rumors swirling about her struggles with alcohol and loneliness. Her final print interview, tucked away in a back section of a 1936 trade paper, is as raw and revealing as anything you'll find from Hollywood's early days. Provost doesn't shy away from her hardships. She admits, "The pictures forgot me, but I never forgot how to make people laugh. That was always the part I loved." She talks openly about how Hollywood rewards you for youth and beauty, then punishes you for keeping neither. Instead of bitterness, there's a wry resilience in her words. She makes a self-deprecating joke about being the original has-been before it was trendy, yet also defends her right to dignity and survival. Provost reflects on her fall from grace without blame, saying, "I made mistakes. So did the town. Maybe I should have fought harder. Or maybe the fight was never fair." She confesses her struggles with drinking, but insists she never lost her sense of humor. Tragically, this interview would be her last. Provost died in poverty and near anonymity, her passing only briefly noted in the papers she once graced. Yet, in her last words, there's a haunting defiance. "If laughter is all I leave, let it be enough." For a woman written off by the town that made her, it's the perfect, bittersweet sign-off. Donald O'Connor. For a while, Donald O'Connor could do no wrong. He was the dynamo behind Singin' in the Rain's most riotous moments, the guy who could make Gene Kelly crack up on cue and dance up the walls, literally. But O'Connor's career, like so many in the MGM era, was built on a studio system that aged its talent out with ruthless efficiency. By the 1960s, the big musicals were gone, and so too was O'Connor's starring power. His last major interview, recorded for Turner Classic Movies, is a masterclass in bittersweet nostalgia. O'Connor is cheerful, quick with a quip, but there's a shadow in the edges of his smile. He reminisces about the relentless pace of the studio machine. "You weren't allowed to get tired, and if you did, you'd better fake it." He's proud of his achievements, but candid about how the business discarded its stars. "Song and dance men, we were like vaudeville. Once the curtain fell, nobody looked back. O'Connor laughs about his brief stabs at television and the odd guest spot. But it's clear he missed the camaraderie and creative chaos of old Hollywood. When the interviewer asks if he regrets anything, O'Connor shrugs. I wish I'd saved more, laughed more, and danced more for myself, not just the cameras. As the interview ends, O'Connor offers one last, quietly defiant line. You can take the spotlight away, but you can't take the dance out of a man. His legacy may not burn as bright as some, but in his final interview, he's still ready to break into a number, just in case anyone remembers to watch. Anna May Wong. Anna May Wong's name rarely tops Hollywood's history books, but it should. She was the first Chinese-American film star, a woman who broke barriers in an industry built to keep her out. In the 1920s and 30s, Wong's beauty and charisma landed her in classics like Shanghai Express and Piccadilly. Yet the very town that celebrated her talent always kept her at arm's length, forcing her into exotic stereotypes or supporting roles denied to white actresses in yellowface. No matter how hard she worked, real stardom stayed just out of reach. In her last interview, recorded by the BBC in the late 1950s, Wong sits in a London studio, elegant and unguarded. She doesn't bother hiding her frustration with the industry that both made and limited her. Hollywood had a place for me, she says, but never the place I wanted. She speaks with calm candor about the racism she endured, the heartbreak of being passed over for lead roles, and her bittersweet pride in having opened doors, even if she rarely got to walk through them herself. Wong's voice is reflective, but not defeated. She talks about her return to the stage in England, her advocacy for Asian American actors, and her belief that change, slow as it is, must come. When asked what advice she'd give to the next generation, her answer is both wise and weary. Be bold. Don't let them write your story for you. Just months after this interview, Wong died suddenly, leaving behind a legacy Hollywood has only recently started to appreciate. Her last recorded words are a subtle rebuke and a blessing for every outsider. There's more than one way to shine in the dark. In a business that tried so hard to box her in, Anna May Wong's last words were all about breaking free. George Reeves. To a generation of post-war kids, George Reeves was Superman. He wore the cape, he saved the day, and he made millions believe a man could fly. But off-screen, Reeves was a very different hero, one burdened by typecasting, frustration, and a parade of personal disappointments. By the late 1950s, Reeves was stuck. His career stalled, his relationship scrutinized, his own sense of identity tangled up in red and blue tights. Reeves's last major public interview wasn't on TV, but over the airwaves of a small California radio station. Sitting alone with the DJ, Reeves talked candidly about his complicated relationship with the Superman persona. People don't want George, they want the suit, he joked, but the laughter sounded thin. He opened up about the pain of being passed over for other roles, the isolation fame had brought him, and the constant pressure to live up to a character he'd stopped playing years before. The conversation turned unexpectedly poignant when Reeves was asked what advice he'd give his younger self. He hesitated, then said, "Don't let them tell you who you are, and don't get stuck believing it either." It was a moment of rare self-awareness, one that revealed the man behind the myth. Within months, Reeves was found dead in his home, under circumstances that still spark debate. His final interview stands as a quiet cry for recognition beyond the mask. Everyone loves a hero, but nobody wants to know what happens when the story ends. Even in his last words, George Reeves was reaching for something more than just another leap over tall buildings in a single bound. He wanted to be seen. Peg Antwistle. Peg Antwistle's name is forever linked to Hollywood's darkest symbol, the day she jumped from the H of the iconic sign in 1932. But before she became a cautionary tale, Antwistle was a Broadway hopeful with stars in her eyes. The move to Hollywood was supposed to be her big break. Instead, she found herself fighting for scraps in a town that valued her looks, but never gave her a real shot. Her last interview, lost for decades in local radio archives, was with a Los Angeles DJ who caught her after a theater rehearsal. Peg is honest, even raw. She speaks of her struggles with getting noticed, her disappointment in Hollywood's broken promises, and her dreams of returning to the stage. "Film is magic, but the real magic is in living," she says with a soft laugh. "I want to be remembered for something I chose, not for something I lost." The most striking part of the interview is its hopefulness. Despite her setbacks, Antwistle talks about her upcoming audition and her plans for the future. "You have to keep believing," she insists, "even when the town stops believing in you." It's the kind of optimism that aches in hindsight. Tragically, just weeks after this broadcast, Antwistle's body was found beneath the sign. Her legacy became a ghost story, but her final words were anything but spectral. "I'm still here, aren't I?" For all the myth and melancholy, Peg Antwistle's last interview is a reminder that even forgotten stars once burned with real, stubborn light. Ramon Navaro. Ramon Navaro was the Latin heartthrob of silent and early sound Hollywood. A matinee idol whose brooding looks and quiet charm sent audiences into a frenzy. In the 1920s, Navaro was MGM's answer to Valentino, starring in epics like Ben-Hur and Mata Hari. But as the industry's spotlight shifted and the whispers about his private life grew louder, Navaro found himself gradually pushed to the periphery, another relic of a more romantic, repressed era. In his final print interview, granted to a Mexican journalist in the late 1960s, Navaro is frank, gracious, and heartbreakingly self-aware. The conversation takes place at his modest Los Angeles home, far from the golden glow of Hollywood's heyday. Navaro speaks openly about how fame can fade, the pain of being forgotten by Hollywood, and the double-edged sword of living in the public eye. He admits that, as he aged, invitations stopped coming. The phone went silent, and the people who once courted him for premieres became strangers. But what stands out most is Navaro's candor about lost love and longing. He recalls, with wistfulness, the relationships he had to keep secret, and the loneliness that haunted even his brightest days. "You can be adored by millions," he says, "and still feel invisible in your own life." The journalist asks if he has regrets, and Navaro smiles sadly. "Only that I didn't live louder, that I let fear steal some of my joy." Navaro's final words in print linger. "The world is quick to forget, but we remember ourselves. In the end, love is what stays." Just a few months later, Navaro's life ended violently, his final act written by the very loneliness he confessed. Yet, in his last interview, he's clear-eyed, a faded star who knew his real story was bigger than the headlines. Linda Darnell. Linda Darnell's story reads like a classic Hollywood parable. Unbelievable beauty, meteoric rise, and a spiral out of the limelight so steep it borders on myth. Darnell was Fox's answer to Lana Turner and Gene Tierney, a sultry presence in films like Forever Amber and A Letter to Three Wives. But for all her on-screen heat, Darnell's personal life was beset by failed marriages, financial trouble, and the relentless typecasting that Hollywood specializes in. Her final TV interview, recorded in a small theater during her comeback attempt in the early 1960s, is both inspiring and quietly devastating. Darnell sits backstage, wrapped in a shawl, makeup wiped clean, her face softer, but her eyes still burning with ambition. She speaks with humility about being discarded by Hollywood, the agony of starting over, and the solace she finds in live performance. "The stage doesn't care about age or headlines," she says. "If you have the truth in you, the audience will find it." She talks about battling insecurity and about how the glamour of her youth left her ill-prepared for real life. Yet, she's determined to define herself outside the shadow of the studios. "Maybe I'm not a movie star anymore, but I'm still an actress. That's all I ever wanted to be." When the interviewer asks if she thinks Hollywood will ever welcome her back, Darnell shakes her head. "I don't need their welcome. I just need to work." Days after the interview aired, Darnell died tragically in a house fire while staying with a friend. Her last words on camera? "You can lose everything in Hollywood, except the part of you that still wants to shine." A fitting curtain call for a woman who never stopped reaching for the spotlight, even as it faded. Alan Ladd. Alan Ladd's name may not echo today like it did in the 1940s, but for a stretch, he was the ultimate American movie hero. With his cool demeanor and quiet intensity, Ladd was unforgettable in classics like Shane and This Gun for Hire. Off-screen, he was known for being reserved, almost painfully shy in an industry that chewed up the meek. Ladd's last magazine interview, published just months before his untimely death, is a study in melancholy and grace. He reflects on his career with gentle honesty, admitting he never quite felt comfortable with fame. People see a cowboy, a killer, a hero. They don't see the man who gets nervous at parties and misses his kids. He talks about the loneliness of the film business, how stardom can isolate you, and the pressure to stay young, stay tough, stay needed. A treadmill that's impossible to outrun. What's most revealing is Ladd's confession about feeling obsolete as Hollywood's tastes changed. He'd watched as the town he helped build simply moved on, offering fewer roles and less respect for the stoic archetype he embodied. "It's not bitterness," he says. "It's just how the story goes." When asked if he has advice for aspiring actors, Ladd's response is both tender and cautionary. Don't let the camera love you more than you love yourself. He closes the interview with a wistful line that could be written on every studio gate. Every picture ends, and so does every era. But the memories, if you're lucky, stick around. Within weeks, Alan Ladd was gone, but his understated dignity endures, a reminder that even the softest spoken legends deserve their last word. Frances Farmer. Frances Farmer was once touted as the next Garbo, a luminous talent with a razor-sharp mind and zero patience for Hollywood's games. She was the star of Come and Get It and Rhythm on the Range, but her refusal to play nice with studio bosses made her an outcast. Worse, her struggles with mental illness became headline fodder for a gossip-hungry public. Forced into psychiatric institutions, Farmer was silenced by an industry and a society that couldn't tolerate her defiance or her suffering. Her final interview, recorded for a Seattle radio program not long before her death, is the rarest of Hollywood documents, raw, unscripted, and almost painfully honest. Farmer sounds tired, but never defeated. She speaks candidly about the trauma of being institutionalized, the cruelty of shock treatments, and the loneliness of watching her dreams dissolve. Yet, she's unsparing toward herself, refusing to let bitterness poison her final words. "I made mistakes," she admits, "but I made them out loud. I never wanted to be anyone's victim or anyone's example, just myself." Farmer rails against the industry that labeled her difficult and the media that treated her breakdown as a spectacle. Still, there's a spark of pride when she talks about finding peace outside of show business, teaching, writing, living quietly in her last years. When the interviewer asks if she has any regrets, Farmer's reply is simple and searing. "Only that I didn't shout louder when it mattered." Her last words hang in the air, equal parts warning and benediction. Frances Farmer's final interview is a testament to survival, the kind that doesn't always make the movies, but is more heroic for it. Hollywood never forgets to celebrate its legends, but it's the forgotten voices that echo longest in the empty wings. These rare last interviews remind us that every star, no matter how bright, eventually faces the final fade-out. So, what do you make of these closing confessions? Tragedy, triumph, or something stranger? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit subscribe, and share your favorite Hollywood what if. Who do you think history should have remembered? The reel ends, but the conversation is just getting started.